Fatherhood forever. More power. Kingmakers and super dads. Sons need their fathers. And fathers need their sons. And what do we both need? Well, I'll tell you. More banter. Didn't used to like that word, banter, but I've changed my mind. Let's think about this one. It's called Fatherhood Forever. More power. Kingmakers and super dads. Sons definitely need their fathers. And fathers need their sons. What do we both need? Well, I say banter. Didn't used to like that word, banter, but I've changed my mind. Let's think about this. This one's called Your Heart. If I'm the only one allowed to upset you, then I must have a special place in your heart. The advantage of knowing how your heart works and permission to pull it apart. Let's start with line 1. I'm allowed to upset you. Well, who would you allow to upset you? I can only imagine that it would have to be someone very close to you. Someone with whom you have what's called a soul tie. Now this reminds me of a song, a couple of songs actually. There's one that says, you always hurt the one you love. I won't sing anymore. And there's a second song that says, I've got you under my skin. Now, to have someone under your skin means you're pretty close to that person, which means that they're in a position to encourage you, promote you, celebrate you, or alternatively, they're in a position to diminish you. And this is the point of a soul tie. It can be a positive or it can be a negative. Now, you can have a soul tie with a complete stranger, someone who starts off as a stranger and then over time becomes close enough so that the relationship can be described as soul tied. It could be your tennis partner, the person with whom you play tennis doubles against other opponents. You get to know that person so well on the court and off the court. You share stuff. You become soul tied. You become interdependent. You have the capacity to impact each other. So you can have a soul tie that begins with someone who was a stranger. Imagine the kind of soul tie you can have with a blood relative, a father and son, for example. In such a soul tie, we can trigger each other with words. So let's talk about that. The soul tie is what David and Jonathan had as young men. David was eventually to become the king of Israel, and Jonathan was, at the time of their boyhood friendship, a prince, son of the king. So David and Jonathan established themselves as best friends, though they were not blood relatives, and the friendship never soured. However, even if you have a blood relative soul tie, as in the case of a father and son, it can sour. This same David, when he was king in later years, fell into a feud with his son, one of his sons, Absalom. And King David was unable to protect himself against the threats of his son Absalom because he loved his son and because he was soul tied to his son. Even when the differences between father and son are not major, even when those differences are petty, it's worth addressing them. It can be very difficult to challenge those that we're in love with, but it's necessary to do so so that things which are small and petty don't eventually become significant, so that small disagreements, be they verbal or otherwise, do not become excuses for real conflict. A scientist named Pavlov was able to prove that we human beings, because he was a behavioral scientist, a scientist of human behavior, was able to prove that we human beings can be triggered to react in predictable ways. He demonstrated this with dogs. He'd ring a bell and the dogs would reliably salivate, produce saliva, a spontaneous reaction that the dogs could not control, an involuntary response to the bell. This was established by using the bell as a trigger, food as the association, the intermediate association, which produced the predictable reaction, the saliva. Similarly, we in soul-tied relationships can trigger each other with words. So let's consider this story. Son says, "Dad, why do you always do that?" Dad says, "What?" Son says, "Roll your eyes." Dad says, "So what? I can't roll my eyes now?" Son says, "Yeah, but I prefer if you just say what you mean." Dad says, "But why do you let it bother you though?" Son says, "I don't." Dad says, "Yes, you do." Father and sons can find themselves locked into particular trigger cycles, whereby a son could ask a particular question or make a particular statement. Dad could mentally associate this statement with a particular emotion, and then dad reacts with a predictable response to that trigger. So here's the question in closing. How can you tell the difference between a joke that's meant to make you laugh and one that's meant to make you cry? Your thoughts in the description, please. And thank you once again, Kingmakers, Super Dads, Kings, Princes, for liking, sharing and commenting. And subscribers get the free MP3, Speakology spoken word, house music, a premix, a download. Do it today, do it now. Fatherhood for life.